first fall of Jerusalem Temple in 587 BC to the fall of Rome in 508 AD, all the way to the American Civil War in 1861, the Restoration movement has found its roots. During the Crusades of 1291 AD, you can begin to see a breakdown within the Christian community. During this time, the Catholics were capturing people and forcing them to convert to Christianity or they would be killed.
In 1517, the Protestant Reformation was really kicked off when Martin Luther published his 95 Theses. The Reformation began the actual split within the Roman Catholic Church, which in turn changed Christianity as a whole. The main goal of these theses was to confront the Catholic Church about indulgences that the Pope was giving in order to take away punishment that anyone had left for remaining sins while they remained in purgatory. These theses really were an attack on the Pope and the Catholic Church.
In the 1630s, 21,000 English Puritans boarded ships and headed to what they knew as the New World. These Puritans had the mindset that they were the new Israel. They believed the state of England was a, quote, unfaithful situation, and that God was to bring his wrath down. Their main reasoning for leaving England was religious and political freedom, also to escape the tyranny of the king.
Around 100 years after this large immigration to the U.S., the four big contributors to the Restoration movement were born: Barton W. Stone, Alexander Campbell, Thomas Campbell, and Walter Scott. From the Cane Ridge Revival to the Stone-Campbell movement, the effect that these men had on our movement was amazing.
Barton W. Stone was born in Maryland in 1772. He studied in Edinburgh. At the age of 25, Thomas Campbell and him began a lifelong friendship. As a preacher, he sparked a Bible reading epidemic. In 1804, his followers began to call themselves Christians. He died in 1844. Thomas Campbell was born in 1763 in Ireland. In April 1807, he moved to the US. He published a declaration and address in which he set forth his convictions about the Church of Jesus Christ. When he began baptizing through immersion, many people joined him.
Alexander Campbell was the son of Thomas Campbell and was born in 1788. He joined in his father's movement as a reformer. This developed non-denominational churches which relied on scripture and few essentials. Both him and his father got their inspiration from the New Testament. Walter Scott was born in 1796 and was an evangelist in the Restoration movement. He also looked to restore New Testament Christianity. Like Thomas Campbell, he replaced believers' baptism with immersion. In 1826, he began working together with the Campbells, and they split off from the Baptists.
The Cane Ridge Revival really kicked off the idea of frontier revivalism. Barton W. Stone started this in 1801. He preached in tents throughout the English colonies. There were 25,000 people at the Cane Ridge Revival.
As Christians came to America, they began living in new areas and reimagining what the Christian faith would look like in their new world. Since there was no denomination fully developed, the colonies would not have been religiously split and crazy like Europe once was. During frontier revivalism, the edges of colonies were beginning to move west and south. An indirect result of this was that anyone and everyone was or could preach. God was on the move in revivals. During this time, many of these preachers were itinerant, meaning they would preach in a town for 2 or 3 days and then leave. Churches began assembling together in church buildings, not just homes. Although the growth in churches was amazing, sometimes when the itinerant preachers would come and baptize so many people, these people would have nowhere to go, so they would end up taking over local churches, and this would upset some people. Sometimes they would also begin their own church. Academies also developed during this time because in order to read scripture well, you had to be educated.
Around 1715, the awakening in America began. During this time, people were getting together in camps listening to a preacher who they typically didn't know. They believed that if you were chosen by God, that He would provide you with an experience to ensure that He picked you. If you've been in the church for some time, you have probably had some debates about instruments. In 1859, the First Restoration Movement Church used an instrument during their worship service in Kentucky, ironically, right in the middle of North and South.
On April 12, 1861, the American Civil War began. This stirred up issues of slavery, racism, and segregation in our Restoration Movement churches. Along with issues of racism, issues of instruments were included. Southern churches couldn't believe that Northern churches would waste their money on expensive instruments, such as organs, rather than helping their starving and poor brothers and sisters in the South.
The four slogans of the Restoration Movement really signify what is found important. Essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; and in all things, love. Where the Bible speaks, we speak. Where the Bible is silent, we are silent. No creed but Christ, no book but the Bible. We are not the only Christians, but we are Christians only.
Although these slogans are key to our movement, there are a few other things that should be said. Our movement believes that the Bible teaches a rational plan for salvation. Baptism through immersion is where Christian faith and a personal walk with Jesus begins. We need unity between all Christians as well as restore the primitive New Testament church in simplifying our Christian practice. In his writing, Why We Need a New Wave of Restorationism, John Nugent says, I suggest we restore the church as it was in the New Testament day, rooting it firmly in the pattern set by the early disciples. With its roots there, it can sway and bend to adjust to the times, but fundamentally it would always be the same. A strong tree is still a tree, whatever winds blow, and the church would still be the church despite men's opinions blowing about it.
Our movement is still working toward its goal. The Restoration Movement hasn't failed, but it has lost sight of what it really believes in.
Through our blindness, we can find unity and refine our goals. When it comes down to it, the only thing we know we have for sure is the Bible. Scripture should be what we center our lives on, since it is all we have. When we put our lives in line with Scripture, we are in line with what God has called His church to be and do.
Our people have made peace with other believers through allowing our students at other denominational schools and our pastors attending multi-denominational conferences. Churches are beginning to see themselves as part of the mainstream evangelicalism. This means we recognize the faithfulness of other Christian traditions. We are not the only Christians, but we are Christians only.
In our modern world of chaos made up of
racism,
war,
and hate,
our movement should be the visible component that steps into these situations. If we preach love and unity, why is it not here?